Hello, hello, hello. So we are one day before Purim. Purim starts tomorrow night. Now, one of the very important things about life is a actual cycle. Life is made up of time. Now, time, of course, is a cycle. There's a day, which is a cycle. There is a year, which is a cycle. A month, which is a cycle. And even a life is a cycle because ultimately we are born in a spiritual universe and our life comes in this world, goes out, comes in, goes out. In fact, I just studied from Kabbalah that the soul of Moses effectively implants itself in the Jewish people, and they sort of cycle generation after generation. They bring their mission is to be a light unto the world, to bring the light of the Torah, the light of God to the world, which now, after thousands of years of having done that, we have successfully brought a better consciousness to the world. So we are in a very, very auspicious time. Historically, we're 30 years, and every time you have a cycle, it's very, very important. We're 30 years from the Gulf War, and the Gulf War was an amazing, miraculous time. The Rebbe said that the miracles of the Gulf War were even greater than going out of Egypt. Can you imagine that? Because going out, sorry, let me rephrase that. I made a mistake. Even greater than the Purim story. The Purim story was a 7-year story, and this was within, anybody that remembers, was like maybe a couple of months maximum. And he had, I think, one of the largest armies in the world. He was completely decimated. He threw 39 Scud missiles, which are serious things, at Israel. And bottom line is that he did not succeed in anything in harming the Jewish people. So there were great miracles. In fact, amazingly, it was predicted, the Rebbe had said that the war would end on Purim, and the war actually ended on Purim. The Rebbe said that people are thinking, where are the miracles in our time? So we have to realize we are seeing incredible miracles. Miracles after miracles after miracles. I'm going to highlight 5 of them. The first is that everything is a parallel reality. We are about to enter into the Messianic redemption, and just as the Jews left Egypt, there were great miracles. So also today, obviously the greatest are yet to come, but we are already witnessing many of them. And let's mention the 5, to my mind, greatest miracles of our generation. The first miracle is actually a spiritual revolution. It said that God would send 10 hungers to the world. 9 of them would be for food, and 1 of them would be actually for the Word of God, for spirituality. And so we're living in a time now that we have literally the majority of the world seeking God in a spiritual relationship with God and growing. That's an amazing thing. That's messianic, because that was the whole point of the world, that people from their own self within prosperity, not that I'm seeking God because I need bread, but I'm seeking God because I need truth. And then you have an infinite journey ahead of you with God and with truth. So it's an amazing thing that the world already has begun doing. And that's why, of course, there's the antagonism from the dark side towards that, with very stupid, rehashed arguments, but all of it is just ridiculous. The second great miracle of our generation is not only the state of Israel, which is a great miracle, but also the protection of Israel. I spoke to an Israeli who claims to be an atheist, and it was in many wars, he was very involved. When I asked him about the 6-day war, how did we win? He said it was a miracle. People don't realize, the Rebbe also said, actually, he said that if I'm not mistaken, when the Egyptian army, they could have, God forbid, walked into Israel, but they stopped at the border of Israel. And they didn't go in. They waited for 2 days, and then America sent these anti-tank kind of weapons. Basically, you have to understand what this means. They worked for years and years, and they could have just walked right in. Golda Meir, the prime minister, had Sinai ready to take. And yet, that war turned around. And in fact, a friend of mine from Persia, his grandfather was a Kabbalist. He sent his son, and the Jews were doing very well in Persia for a long time, till the crazy clerics took over. But he sent his son, in the beginning of the state of Israel, he said, the winds of the Mashiach are blowing. There will be wars, but the Arabs will never enter. And I personally heard from Nissim Mina, an Israeli officer, this story happened to him, that he was in the, this was the, I think it was the War of 73, the Yom Kippur War. And sorry, what I mentioned before with Egypt was actually the Yom Kippur War. And so basically, there was, without making too lengthy, the longer you go, the more people you lose. But the bottom line was that the Egyptians had, not the Egyptians, the Syrians, they had engaged the Israeli tanks in different battles on the Golan Heights. And there was one bridge into Israel. It's actually a very brilliant strategy. And there were like 8 tanks that were basically kind of just hidden in the sand dunes, whatever. They didn't see them. And then suddenly these 8 tanks, he was there with his men, about 500 soldiers. They just had like 2 jeeps. Suddenly they hear these 8 tanks. So these 8 tanks, they could have just kind of gone, God forbid, gone into Israel, and it would have been a disaster. And so he was called to basically deal with it. So he said 2 jeeps against 8 tanks is like 2 mice against 8 elephants. And so they literally went on a suicide mission just to kind of slow the advance of these tanks. And they drove slowly towards the tanks, and he had 500 soldiers behind him. And basically, their orders were not to shoot, not to provoke, because they would have just been finished. And the barrels of the guns were focused on them. And then a miracle happened. They stopped. They turned the barrels of the guns to the left. They got out and they surrendered. So I asked them, why did they surrender? So that intelligence, and the intelligence said this also about when they were at Egypt, they saw an angel with a hand that went like this like large being. So in other words, God not only gave us Israel, but he's protecting us all the time. And soon, again, we have these crazy Iranian clerics that want to, God forbid, destroy Israel. But the fact is that Israel's going to get rid of their nuclear weapons. And this will bring the Mashiach, where it says very clearly when Israel goes into Syria, the Mashiach will come. So, just recently they've been bombing in and around Damascus. It says in the Kabbalah when Damascus is hit. So we are about to enter into the complete and total Messianic era. So the key thing right now is to have faith, is to have joy, and to realize that all of life, there's a macro reality and a micro reality. The macro reality is, of course, what God is doing with the whole world, which we've never had it better, whether it's physically, spiritually, it's never been better. And it will always get better. That's the beauty of it, just as technology exponentially increases. Spirituality as well. The laws of microchips is that every 6 months, I believe, they get double the speed and half the price. So that's what's happening. We're getting quicker and quicker spiritually and physically. Everything's getting better and better. And on a micro level, and that's really the story of Purim, that God is your personal God. Your life matters. Your destiny matters. You are on a journey. Everything you do is precious. And that's the message. Take that message to your heart and spread it to the world.